When the wedding invitation arrived, I stared at it for a long time before opening it. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with gold lettering spelling my name as if I still belonged in the family. My hands hesitated. My sister, Alina, hadn't spoken to me in 3 years. Not since the night I left home with one suitcase and a promise to myself that I would never again beg for approval from a father who believed fear was the same thing as respect. I thought it had to be a mistake. But it wasn't. Inside was a formal invitation to her wedding, along with a short handwritten note. I hope you come. No apology. No explanation. Just hope. I told myself I wouldn't go. I had built a quiet life far away from the suffocating expectations of my childhood. I worked long hours building my small media business from scratch, and although money was tight, every achievement belonged to me alone. Still, that single line lingered in my mind. I hope you come. Maybe this was a chance to stand in the same room with my family without anger. Maybe time had softened things. Maybe my father had changed. Or maybe I was still the same son, hoping for approval I would never receive. 2 weeks later, I found myself standing inside the grand ballroom of a luxury hotel, surrounded by crystal chandeliers and towering arrangements of white roses. Guests drifted through the room in designer suits and glittering dresses, their laughter blending with a soft hum of string music. I suddenly felt out of place. My suit was the best I owned, but compared to the polished elegance around me, it felt small, like I had stepped into a world that had long ago decided I didn't belong. Then I saw him. My father stood near the stage, speaking with business associates, his posture rigid, his presence dominating the space around him. He looked exactly the same, tall, commanding, and impossible to ignore. As if sensing me, he turned. Our eyes met. The air between us froze. No warmth, no recognition. Only a cold acknowledgement before he turned away and continued his conversation. The message was clear. You are here, but you do not matter. Alina greeted me a few minutes later, her smile bright for the guests, but distant when she hugged me. I'm glad you came, she said softly. Then, under her breath, please don't cause any drama. I won't, I replied. And I meant it. I took my seat during the ceremony and watched my sister walk down the aisle, radiant and hopeful. For a brief moment, pride replaced the heaviness in my chest. The music swelled, vows were exchanged, and applause filled the room. Maybe this night could pass peacefully. Maybe the past could stay buried. But deep inside, tension coiled like a tightening wire. Years of silence. Years of resentment. Years of words never spoken. As the reception began and guests filled the tables, I felt the weight of my father's presence growing closer. I didn't know it yet, but before the night ended, everything would explode, and nothing in our family would ever be the same again. The reception was loud, bright, and filled with forced laughter. I kept to myself at first. I clapped during the speeches, smiled when people glanced my way, and tried to remain invisible. That had always been my survival skill in this family. Stay quiet, stay small, don't provoke him. But invisibility has an expiration date. It started during dinner. An uncle I barely knew leaned back in his chair, wine glass in hand, and asked loudly, "So, what are you doing these days?" Still chasing those little internet dreams. The table went quiet. I felt it instantly, the shift. Conversation slowed. Forks paused midair. They were waiting for entertainment. I run a digital media company, I answered calmly. It's growing. A faint smirk spread across my father's face. Growing, he repeated. You call posting videos online a business? A few guests chuckled nervously. I swallowed. I could have let it go. I almost did. But something inside me, something tired of shrinking, pushed back. It's more than that, I said. It's mine. I built it without anyone's help. That did it. His chair scraped sharply against the floor as he stood. You walked away from this family, he said, voice controlled but shaking underneath. You embarrassed us. And now you stand here pretending you've accomplished something? The room felt smaller, hotter. I didn't walk away, I said quietly. I left because I couldn't breathe in that house. Gasps. Someone whispered, Not here. My sister's smile had vanished. Her eyes darted between us, panic rising. Let's step outside, my father said, gripping my arm before I could refuse. His fingers tightened as he steered me toward the hallway just beyond the ballroom doors. The music continued behind us, laughter, clinking glasses, like the world hadn't noticed the storm moving just outside the walls. The hallway was quieter, but not empty. A few guests lingered nearby. Why do you always do this? He hissed once we were alone enough. You can never just respect me. Respect. I finally snapped. You controlled everything. What I studied, who I spoke to, how I lived. That's not respect. That's fear.
His face changed.
I saw it happen. That flash I remembered from childhood. The split second where anger erased reason. You ungrateful. Before I could finish my breath, his hand shoved me hard. My back slammed into the wall with a force that knocked the air from my lungs. The sound echoed down the hallway. Someone screamed. I slid slightly before catching myself, chest burning, heart racing. He stood over me, chest heaving, unaware of the phones now pointed in our direction. You will not disrespect me, he shouted. But this wasn't a private moment anymore. A guest near the entrance had already started recording when the voices rose. Another lifted their phone instinctively. Within seconds, multiple cameras captured everything: his rage, the shove, my stunned expression against the wall. Security rushed in. He stepped back immediately, straightening his jacket as if nothing had happened. It was a misunderstanding, he said sharply. But it wasn't. And deep down, I knew something irreversible had just occurred. The music inside kept playing. But outside those ballroom doors, the illusion of our perfect family had shattered, and this time, it wasn't going to stay hidden. I barely slept that night. My back still ached where it had struck the wall, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the storm inside my chest. After security separated us, I left the hotel without saying goodbye to anyone. Not my sister, not the guests, not even the past I had tried to confront. By the time I reached my apartment, my phone battery was dead. I plugged it in, collapsed onto the couch, and stared at the ceiling until exhaustion finally pulled me under. Morning arrived like an explosion. My phone vibrated nonstop on the table beside me. Missed calls.
Dozens of them.
Messages stacked across the screen. Numbers I didn't recognize, old classmates, distant relatives, even coworkers I barely spoke to. My stomach tightened as I opened the first message. Is this you in that video? Another. I'm so sorry. You didn't deserve that. And then, turn on the news. My hands felt numb as I opened social media. The video was everywhere. The clip showed the hallway outside the ballroom, my father's hand gripping my collar, the shove, my body slamming into the wall, his furious face frozen in rage. Someone had added captions. Prominent businessman assaults son at daughter's wedding. Power. Pride. Abuse caught on camera. The view count climbed in real time. 850,000. 1.2 million. 2 million. By noon, it had crossed 5 million views. I stared at the screen in disbelief. For decades, my father had controlled every narrative. Inside our home, his version of events was the only version that existed. If he shouted, it was discipline. If he humiliated you, it was character building. If you cried, you were weak. But now the world was watching. And they weren't seeing a respected, disciplined patriarch. They were seeing a man shove his own son into a wall in a hallway full of witnesses. Notifications flooded in faster than I could read them. Strangers shared their own stories of toxic parents. Some said they had cried watching the clip. Others thanked me for standing there without striking back. I hadn't stood there out of strength. I had stood there because I was stunned. Because even at my age, a part of me was still that child trying not to provoke him. By afternoon, news outlets had picked up the story. A split-screen broadcast replayed the shove in slow motion while commentators discussed family violence behind social status. I muted the television. Then my sister called.
Her voice was shaking.
Do you know what's happening? She whispered. Yes. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I closed my eyes. I didn't post it. I know, she said softly, but it's everywhere. After we hung up, I sat in silence, the weight of millions of eyes pressing down on a moment that had once belonged only to my family. For the first time in my life, the truth wasn't trapped inside our walls. It was out in the open, and nothing would ever be hidden the same way again. By the third day, the story was no longer just a viral clip. It had become a public spectacle. News vans lined the street outside my father's corporate headquarters. Reporters stood behind barricades, rehearsing lines about family violence and power behind closed doors. Every hour, the video replayed across television screens, dissected frame by frame like evidence in a trial. The man who had spent his entire life protecting his reputation was now trapped inside a narrative he couldn't control. Inside the company, things were beginning to fracture. A former employee posted anonymously online describing my father's temper during meetings, the shouting, the threats, the culture of fear. Others followed. Stories accumulated. Patterns formed. What had once been dismissed as strict leadership was suddenly being called something else. Toxic. Investors released cautious statements. Business partners spoke about reviewing relationships. One sponsor quietly removed his photo from their website. I watched it all unfold from my small apartment, stunned by how quickly power could erode when the illusion supporting it cracked. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my sister. When I answered, I could hear exhaustion in her breathing. "I can't leave the house," she said. "Photographers are outside. They're asking guests questions. They're messaging my husband." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "This wasn't supposed to happen," she whispered. "It was my wedding." I sat in silence for a moment before replying. "It was never about you." She didn't argue, because deep down she knew. Growing up, every celebration, every holiday, every achievement had revolved around one thing: maintaining the image of a perfect family under the authority of a perfect father. Any crack in that image was treated like betrayal. Now the crack was visible to the entire world. Later that evening, an unfamiliar number appeared on my screen. When I answered, a calm voice introduced herself as a journalist requesting a comment. I declined. Then another call came. And another. Emails filled my inbox with interview requests, statements requests, documentary inquiries. Everyone wanted the story. But for me, it wasn't a story. It was my childhood. Meanwhile, social media continued to surge with support. Survivors shared messages thanking me for not retaliating. Psychologists posted analyses about abusive family dynamics. Advocacy groups requested permission to share the video as an example of emotional and physical control. The narrative was shifting beyond a single moment of violence. It was becoming a conversation. That night, I stood at my apartment window watching traffic pass below, my reflection faint in the glass. For years, my father had ruled through silence and intimidation. Now silence was no longer protecting him. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what would happen next. Because the truth, once exposed, doesn't quietly return to the shadows. It forces everything into the light. The legal notice arrived on a gray Tuesday morning. It was slipped under my apartment door in a large brown envelope, thick and official-looking, the kind designed to intimidate before it's even opened. My name was printed in bold black letters across the front, and in the corner sat the logo of one of the most expensive law firms in the city, the same firm my father had used for decades. My hands felt heavy as I picked it up. For a long moment, I just stared at it. Growing up, legal threats had been one of his favorite weapons. Contracts, warnings, ultimatums, tools to remind everyone that power wasn't just personal in our house, it was institutional. I already knew what the letter would say. Still, my chest tightened as I opened it. The language was cold, precise, and unmistakably aggressive. Defamation, character damage, intentional reputational harm. It claimed the viral video had caused severe financial and emotional damage. It demanded that I issue a public statement clarifying the incident as a misunderstanding. It insisted I cooperate in removing defamatory content.
At the bottom sat a deadline.
And beneath it, the threat of legal action. I let out a slow breath. I hadn't posted the video. I hadn't spoken publicly. I had done nothing except exist in a moment someone else recorded. But he needed control. And when control slips, intimidation follows. My phone buzzed moments later, as if timed. A message from an unknown number. Sign the statement. This can still go away. No name. No greeting. Just pressure. I placed the phone face down on the table and sat in silence, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside my window. Years ago, this would have terrified me. I would have apologized, taken the blame, shrunk myself to make the conflict disappear. But something inside me had shifted the night of the wedding. Millions of people had seen the truth. The silence that protected him no longer protected me. By afternoon, the story of the legal notice somehow leaked online. I never discovered how. Within hours, public reaction ignited again. Commentators called the lawsuit an attempt to bully a victim into silence. Legal analysts debated whether the claim had any merit. Advocacy groups criticized the move as a classic intimidation tactic used by powerful figures to suppress damaging narratives. The pressure that had once been focused solely on me was now turning outward. Toward him. Toward the system he trusted to protect his image. That evening, my sister called again. He's furious, she whispered. The board is pressuring him. Investors are asking questions. He thinks you're behind everything. I'm not, I said quietly. I know, she replied after a pause. But he's never believed truth matters more than control. After we hung up, I looked again at the legal notice, lying on the table. For years, documents like this had been symbols of his power. Now it felt like evidence of his fear. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the envelope. For the first time in my life, I wasn't planning how to avoid his anger. I was preparing to stand still and let it pass through me. Because fear only works when you obey it. And I was done obeying. The email arrived just after sunrise. National Morning Network. Interview request. I almost deleted it. Since the video exploded online, requests from journalists had flooded my inbox. Most wanted sound bites.
Some wanted drama.
Others wanted a villain and a victim neatly packaged into a headline. I had stayed silent. Silence was familiar, safe, predictable. But this request felt different. The producer wrote that the segment would focus on family trauma, generational control, and healing, not sensationalism. They wanted my perspective, not my anger. I stared at the screen for a long time. My hands trembled slightly as memories surfaced, shouting echoing through hallways, doors slamming, the constant pressure to perform perfection. For years, those experiences had existed only inside me, unnamed and unchallenged. Going on television meant saying them out loud. It meant there would be no taking them back. By mid-morning, I heard myself say, yes. The studio lights were brighter than I expected. A technician clipped a microphone to my jacket while another adjusted the chair. Across from me, the host offered a gentle smile, not the sharp, hungry expression I had feared. We're not here for spectacle, she assured me. Just your truth. When the cameras went live, my heartbeat pounded in my ears. The host introduced the viral video, the public reaction, and the broader conversation it had sparked. Then she turned to me. What did that moment feel like for you? Not what did he do? Not why did he do it? But what did it feel like? I swallowed. It felt familiar, I said quietly. Not the shove itself, but the anger behind it. I grew up believing fear was the price of belonging. That respect meant obedience. That silence kept the peace. The studio was still. I spoke slowly, choosing honesty over drama. I explained how control can hide behind success. How families protect appearances at the expense of truth. How leaving wasn't rebellion, it was survival. I didn't insult my father. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't seek revenge. I simply described reality. When the segment ended, the host squeezed my hand. Thank you for your courage, she said. But courage wasn't what I felt. I felt lighter. By evening, clips from the interview spread across social media. not because of the violence, because of the vulnerability. Viewers shared moments where I spoke about breaking cycles of fear. Therapists praised the conversation about emotional control. Survivors wrote messages saying they felt seen for the first time. The narrative was shifting. This was no longer about a shove in a hallway. It was about what happens inside homes where power replaces love. That night, I sat in my apartment, watching the city lights flicker beyond my window. For most of my life, my father's voice had defined who I was. Now, for the first time, the world had heard mine. And I realized something quietly powerful. Telling the truth doesn't destroy you. It introduces you to yourself. The week after my television interview aired, the tone of the coverage began to change. At first, the headlines had focused on the wedding incident, the shove, the viral clip, the public outrage. But now journalists were asking deeper questions. Business analysts discussed leadership culture. Psychologists spoke about authoritarian parenting and control. Commentators debated how power shields behavior until exposure makes denial impossible. The story was no longer about one moment. It was about a pattern. And patterns are harder to dismiss. Inside my father's company, the pressure intensified. An internal memo leaked online suggesting the board of directors had called an emergency meeting. Investors demanded reassurance. A major partner issued a statement emphasizing their commitment to ethical leadership standards. Industry forums buzzed with speculation about whether the company's reputation could recover. For decades, my father had ruled through certainty. He projected strength, demanded loyalty, and dismissed dissent. Employees rarely challenged him, not because they agreed, but because disagreement carried consequences. Now, former staff were speaking anonymously. One described meetings where executives were publicly humiliated. Another recalled explosive temper outbursts behind closed doors. A third wrote about the culture of fear that kept everyone silent. None of these stories surprised me, but seeing them surface in public felt surreal, like watching secrets escape a locked room. Late one afternoon, my sister called again. Her voice sounded different this time, less panicked, more reflective. The board asked him to take temporary leave, she said quietly. I closed my eyes. That would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. He's blaming the media, she continued, saying they're twisting everything. What do you think? I asked. There was a long pause. I think people are finally saying things they were always afraid to say. Outside my window, traffic hummed steadily, ordinary life continuing beneath an extraordinary shift in my own. I never wanted to destroy him, I said. I know, she replied, but silence was destroying everyone else. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, scrolling through messages from strangers who shared their own stories. Fathers who ruled with intimidation, mothers who protected appearances over truth, families where love was conditional on obedience. The viral moment had opened a door. Behind it stood thousands of voices that had been waiting to be heard. That evening, a financial news alert flashed across my phone. The company's stock had dropped sharply amid leadership uncertainty and reputational concerns. I stared at the headline, not with satisfaction, but with a strange, quiet gravity. This wasn't victory. This was consequence. Power built on fear can appear unshakable for years. It can dominate rooms, silence voices, and shape reality to suit itself. But when fear loses its grip, what remains is truth. And truth doesn't negotiate. As night settled over the city, I turned off my phone and sat in the quiet, aware that something fundamental had shifted, not just in the public eye, but inside me. For the first time in my life, my father was no longer the immovable force at the center of everything. He was just a man facing the weight of his choices. And the world was watching. My sister texted me late Sunday night.
Can we meet?
Alone. No cameras. No drama. I stared at the message for a long time before replying. We hadn't truly talked in years, not since the night I left home, and she stood silently in the hallway, watching but saying nothing. I had carried that silence with me like a wound. We agreed to meet the next afternoon at a small cafe across town, far from reporters and curious eyes. When I arrived, she was already there. No wedding makeup. No designer dress. No polished smile for guests. Just Alina. She looked smaller somehow, like the weight of maintaining perfection had finally slipped from her shoulders. For a moment, we just sat across from each other, unsure where to begin. I didn't sleep the night after the wedding, she said quietly. I kept replaying it in my head. I'm sorry, I replied. She shook her head. It wasn't just that moment. It was everything. The words hung between us. Outside, traffic passed. A barista called out an order. Ordinary sounds filled the silence we had avoided for years. I used to think you were selfish for leaving, she continued. I thought you abandoned us. I looked down at my coffee. I thought you chose him, I admitted. Her eyes filled, but she didn't look away. I stayed because I was afraid, she said. Afraid of disappointing him. Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of being alone. Her honesty hit me harder than any accusation ever had. Growing up, we had lived under the same roof but carried different roles. I was the one who resisted. She was the one who complied. I was punished openly. She was rewarded conditionally. Neither of us had been free. He always said you were ungrateful, she whispered. But after the video, after hearing you speak, I realized you were the only one who told the truth. Emotion tightened my throat. I didn't leave to hurt you, I said. I left because staying was breaking me. Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she laughed softly through them. Do you know what I felt when the video went viral? She asked. What? Relief. The word surprised both of us. Because for the first time, she said, everyone could see what we lived with. I didn't have to pretend anymore. We sat in silence, letting that truth settle between us. For years, our relationship had been defined by roles we never chose. Expectations we never questioned. Fear we never named. Now, stripped of those pressures, we were simply brother and sister. Two people shaped by the same storm, finally stepping into clear air. As we stood to leave, she hesitated before hugging me. This time it wasn't brief or performative. It was real. I don't know what happens next, she said. Neither do I replied. But as we walked out into the afternoon light, one thing felt certain. The silence that had divided us for years was gone. And in its place, something fragile but honest had begun to grow. He knocked just after sunset. Not a forceful knock. Not the sharp, impatient pounding I remembered from childhood. This one was hesitant, almost uncertain, as if the man on the other side wasn't sure he would be welcomed. I froze halfway between the kitchen and the door. No one visited unannounced. And somehow, before I even looked through the peephole, I knew. When I opened the door, my father stood there. For a moment, I didn't recognize him. He wasn't wearing one of his tailored suits. No polished shoes. No commanding posture. His shoulders seemed lower, his face lined with exhaustion rather than authority. Time, pressure, and public scrutiny had carved something unfamiliar into his expression. We stood in silence. The hallway light hummed above us. I won't stay long, he said. His voice was quieter than I had ever heard it. I stepped aside, and he entered slowly, glancing around my apartment. The modest furniture, the small desk crowded with equipment, the life I had built without him. This is where you live, he murmured. It wasn't a question. Yes. He nodded once and remained standing, as if unsure he had earned the right to sit. Minutes passed before he spoke again. I saw your interview. I waited. He inhaled deeply, the breath unsteady. I didn't realize, he stopped, searching for words. I thought I was making you strong. That discipline would prepare you for the world. I felt old memories rise, shouting across dinner tables, report cards never good enough, achievements dismissed as insufficient. It made me afraid, I said quietly. His eyes closed briefly, absorbing the words like weight. I know people are talking, he continued. About the company.
About me.
They think this is about the video. He looked up, meeting my eyes directly. But it isn't, is it?
No.
It wasn't about a hallway. It was about years. I was wrong, he said. The words landed softly, yet they echoed louder than any shout I had ever heard from him. For most of my life, he had been incapable of admitting fault. Authority had been his armor. Certainty, his shield. Seeing him without them felt surreal. "I am sorry," he said, voice tightening. For the pressure. For the anger. For the night at the wedding. And for everything before it. Emotion pressed against my chest, complicated and heavy. This was the apology I had imagined hearing as a child, rehearsed in silent fantasies where one sentence could fix everything. But adulthood teaches a harder truth. Apologies don't erase history. They acknowledge it. "I hear you," I said. He nodded slowly, accepting the boundary within those words. We stood in quiet understanding, not reconciliation, not forgiveness fully formed, but the first honest moment we had ever shared as two human beings instead of roles locked in conflict. At the door, he paused before leaving. "I hope someday we can speak again," he said. "Someday," I replied. After he left, I stood in the stillness of my apartment, listening to the fading echo of footsteps down the hallway. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel closure. But I felt something new. The past had finally been named. And sometimes, naming the truth is the first step toward freedom. The video faded from trending pages. News outlets moved on to the next story. Social media notifications slowed, and the relentless commentary that had consumed my life for weeks became background noise. But the impact didn't disappear. Not for me. Not for my sister. Not for my father. For the first time, the family's hidden truths were visible. For the first time, our shared history of fear and control had been witnessed by millions. And for the first time, I realized that exposure didn't weaken me. It strengthened me. I used the attention strategically. I expanded my media company, creating content that highlighted stories of resilience, toxic family dynamics, and the courage to reclaim one's life. Articles, interviews, and documentaries followed. People reached out, grateful for a public example of someone standing firm in the face of family abuse. I found purpose in what had once been just personal pain. Alina and I rebuilt our relationship slowly. Without the pretense and pressure of our father's expectations, we could finally speak honestly. Lunches turned into dinners. Dinners turned into weekend visits. We laughed about childhood memories that had been too painful to share before. And while scars remained, we learned to navigate them together, no longer defined by fear. As for my father, he remained distant. His empire had been shaken. Legal battles lingered, his reputation fractured. But seeing him finally speak the truth, however late, marked a shift I could not ignore. Forgiveness wasn't immediate. Healing wasn't instant. But the door to understanding had opened, and I had the power to step through or not. Sometimes I would scroll through the original video. 5 million views. Millions of strangers had watched that hallway confrontation. Some left angry comments, some supportive messages, some stories of their own. It was surreal to think how one moment of violence, one split second of fear, could ripple across the world. Yet that moment was no longer a symbol of shame. It was a catalyst for change. I reflected on the irony. A shove intended to assert control became the turning point in reclaiming my life. A moment meant to intimidate instead revealed strength, truth, and resilience. I had stood still, and in doing so, I had finally stood free. Standing in my apartment, I realized something profound. Life doesn't wait for apologies, reconciliation, or validation. Life unfolds, often painfully, often unexpectedly. But it also allows for growth, for rebirth, for clarity. And sometimes, the world watching, whether 5 million eyes or one, becomes the witness we never had in our own home. I smiled softly, thinking of my sister, of the company I had built, of the people I had inspired. I wasn't defined by fear, anger, or silence anymore. I was defined by how I chose to live after it. The video had captured a moment. But life, my life, was capturing the rest. And this time I was in control.